Before we get started, I do want to admit I am not a programmer, I am not a software developer, I am a policy wonk, so I'm coming at it from this side of the equation here. But I am here today to talk to you about the Local Gov Technology Alliance, which ICMA, the International City County Management Association, partnered with Esri, the geospatial analysis software, a year ago now today. ICMA is a professional association for local government managers. We have city managers, county administrators, department heads for local government that are among our membership. We have about 9,000 members worldwide. Esri, as I said, is the geospatial software company. And what happened is Esri and ICMA came together last year in 2013 to have a conversation about what's going on in the field. We know that local government needs to take advantage of the technologies that are out there, but right now there's not a common language between those two groups, and so what we're trying to do with the Alliance is create more of that conversation. Moving to, there we go. Local governments have been collecting data for thousands and thousands of years. Here we talk about life events, you know, births, deaths, marriage certificates, and things like that. Local governments also have maintained information on land, whether that's parcel size, zoning codes, or whatever, for years and years and years. But as we move into the future, there's all sorts of new data types that are emerging. For example, Luke talked about 311 systems. And do you all know what a 311 system is? Can I just have a quick show of hands? Okay, it's not universal. 311 is a counterpart to 911, and it is for local governments to take information in from their citizens. So if there is a stray dog in your neighborhood, if there is a pothole on your street, if there is a traffic sign that's down, you can call into a 311 system and report that problem and get the city ready to send a department out to fix that. So that's one of the new types of data that city governments are looking at. They are also looking at financial data through enterprise resource programs. How are we spending the money that we have from taxpayer dollars? There is website data, of course, that's now available, and that's telling us what citizens are looking for and what most interests them. I think Luke's example of the frequently asked questions was an excellent example of that kind of information. And then, of course, social media. Local governments are trying to determine what are people saying in our community, what do we need to be addressing in terms of key issues. So they're wanting to use that data. Sorry, the system isn't catching up with me right now. So they're wanting to use that data in a better way, but they need the apps and the dashboards to add value to their data. ICMA represents smaller communities. A lot of our members are in the population side of 20,000 or less, and then we also have a lot of small to mid-sized cities that are in the 25,000 to 500,000 range. For a lot of these really small communities, there's not a lot of money to invest in technology. And so it's a challenge for them. I had one community that came up to me during a workshop at our annual conference last year that was wanting to ask me about apps. They had gone through 3 sets of apps in the time period of, say, about 2 years. Now, the initial apps weren't that expensive. They were maybe in the $7,000 or $8,000 range. But when you're a small community and you're having to constantly revamp because a product isn't doing what you want it to do, that's a problem for them. The other thing is that local governments do have processes and procedures that they have to follow by law. And so it's important that the apps that are being designed reflect those procedures that they are expected to follow. So how did we go about addressing this, or how are we? Because we are still a very young project. We started out last spring, with a whiteboarding exercise. And what we did was we brought in 12 local government managers from all across the country. The smallest community represented there was Lake Isabella in Michigan. They had a population of 1,700. And our largest city that we had involved there was Montgomery County, Maryland, which has a population of well over 900,000. So it was really running the gamut. And we had all of the geographical areas at this event as well. This group, during the course of one day, came up with well over 200 ideas for apps that they could use. Keep going. Okay. Now, 200 apps is ideas for apps is really a tremendous amount, and it's not something that's very workable. And so what we did was we narrowed this down, and these are the top type of apps that we were looking at. And you'll notice when you look at this list, the top 3 really are citizen engagement type of apps. The whole notion of volunteers and donations, how do you match up what people are interested in doing, whether it's doing park cleanups on the weekend or helping in the school systems with mentoring students. They were looking for ways to match those. And this is especially important not only in day-to-day work, but it's also important for community resiliency. So if there is a disaster, whether it's a hurricane, a drought, brush fires that the West Coast is dealing with, it's important to have that information available and have a way to take that information in for people. Mining social data, Luke talked a little bit about that during his presentation beforehand. What are people saying about your community? What are the issues at hand? What do they want to bring to the public agenda? And then citizen dashboards and tracking. And this is just allowing citizens to get in and find out where the money's going and what's happening and what projects are being done across the city. The next 2 I thought were particularly interesting. They were more about economic development and how do we make our communities grow. And the matching employees to employers is particularly important. We have applications like LinkedIn, which are really good for white collars, but on a blue collar level, there are new applications that are now coming out that will allow skilled labor to be able to input their information in and find out what jobs are available throughout a community or a larger region. And then advertising and promotion. How do we make our community stand out from the field? Why would one business want to locate here, or why would an entrepreneur want to locate in our community versus any other community? So this is the video. The 3 gentlemen here, Tim Wolf is the village manager from Lake Isabella, Michigan. It's the town of 1,700 that we talked about. The next gentleman is Andy Peterson. He's the village manager from Bayside, Wisconsin. It's a town of about 4,500. And then Robert Kiley is from the big thriving metropolis of Forest Lake, Illinois, which is just under 20,000 in population. And I guess I'd like to have you hear what they had to say about data directly from them. So if we could roll that.
Well, Tim and Andy, we've obviously heard an awful lot this morning. What are your general impressions, and what do you think is applicable to your local community?
I think for us, we're a very small community, and it's kind of overwhelming once it's the amount of data that's actually out there, but it's really reassuring what's been shown this morning, how accessible that data can be, especially for a smaller community that might not have the staff ability to invest a lot in an IT department or GIS technical expert. That the data is really user-friendly for small communities to help manage their operations and better respond to their citizen needs.
Yeah, I think what's been interesting for me as a smaller community as well is that the public-private partnership, which I think is where the future is taking us, is that it will help us better our operations, better our service to our residents, and ultimately achieve some more economies of scale, so we can do more or do the same or more with the limited resources that we have.
I don't know how you guys have felt, but it's almost overwhelming. The opportunities are almost endless. And it's really just a question of how can you tap into some of these and prioritize what's most important for my community or your community, Tim, or whatever the case might be. So it's a tremendous amount of data and information out there, and how do we connect all those different data sources is going to be critical.
Yeah, I think too, one of the things that's come out of the morning for me is the, not only the app is not going to fix all of our problems, we still need to have strong management and leadership in all capacities to manage whatever comes in through those technological platforms.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's important too that you look at what data is out there and you look at your community and say, what data do they want? Because some of it might just not be it might be nice to have, but it's just not the driving force of where your community is interested in. You know, is parks more important than, you know, street maintenance issues? You know, where can you prioritize and make your own plan? We're going to look at these data sets and these maps as our priority to connect and have that two-way conversation through technology, through apps with our residents.
Sort of like a Frisbee golf locator app might be interesting, but not a high priority.
It depends on your community, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, for your community, Bob, it would be. It may not be.
That's right. Good college town. That's right.
I did want to particularly point out Lake Isabella, though. Again, it's a town of 1,700 people. And they just, this spring, they will be receiving a national award from the American Planning Association for the best small town rural comprehensive plan. When Tim emailed me about this, he told me in this email that they would not have been able to receive this award if it weren't for their Mind Mixer application, which is one of the products that Luke was talking about, taking citizen engagement in. So even in a really small community like Lake Isabella of 1,700, technology like this can really facilitate that exchange of citizen engagement and bringing people into the decision-making processes of local government. So let's go back. Okay, so we had the whiteboarding exercise in April. It was followed up then this fall by a hackathon. And this was the first time that ICMA had ever done a hackathon, so we had a lot of lessons that we learned through this. But it did help create a dialogue between our membership and the programmers that came. And I guess I'm going to take just a few minutes here. A lot of you are students, and I guess I want to let you know that we will be having a hackathon at our Charlotte conference next fall. That'll be September 13th through the 14th, which is a Saturday and Sunday. And we will have cash prizes that are related to that. They start at $2,500, go down to $1,500, and then $1,000. And it's something that you might be, you know, if you want to do a long car ride, you can come up for it, or we will make it possible to do it virtually as well. So something to consider about that. But here again, we had developers come in and they worked with the local government officials during the conference to develop these apps. And these are the 3 winning apps. And here again, the top 2 are related to transparency issues, which is part of the whole citizen engagement process and providing information about how public monies are being spent. I'm going to go up from the bottom to the top here and just talk a little bit. The one about transferring data I think is particularly important. If you've got field crews who don't have internet access while they're out in the field, they still need to be able to get the most current data before they start their work in the field. And so that's what this initial app was intending to do. They get a fresh update and then they go to the next. I think the voter turnout poll was also one that's of keen interest. Depending on where you locate a polling place for people to go and vote, it can affect voter outcome. If it's an inconvenient location or difficult to get to, that's important to know. So this was an application that counties could use. And then the last one was looking at government spending. How do you take the data of what it costs to actually to fill, say, a pothole? You know, how much staff time is available, how many resources are needed for that, what kind of equipment needs to be sent out, and you can actually get a feel for what it costs to do some of these projects. And so those were the winning applications. What we're hoping to do as we sponsor our next hackathon is create an app exchange. This will be similar to like when you go on to, you know, your personal apps and go to a store and pick out an app or a game or whatever that you want to download to your computer or your iPad. This will be different types of apps that local governments can share with each other and exchange with each other so that they're not having to constantly reinvent the wheel. So with that, I will turn it over to Mark and
Good morning. So I'm my role is that of Chief Data Officer in the City of Philadelphia. I'm the first Chief Data Officer our city has ever had, hopefully not the last. My job, in case you're wondering what it is exactly that a Chief Data Officer does, is to find data and information that is collected by different city departments and agencies, and to make that data available for people outside of government, for them to use it. So I have to make it available in formats that are easily usable and easily consumable. I just wanted to emphasize something from my introduction for those here who may not consider themselves techies or technologists or hackers. I learned how to program on my own because I wanted to show people inside government some ideas that I had. And it's turned out pretty well for me. So don't feel intimidated or discouraged if you don't consider yourself a technologist or a programmer or a coder. You can get acclimated to those skills if you need them in your life, if you have occasion for them. So don't feel discouraged when you hear things like hackathon and coding and apps and things like that. So just before I get started, for the local government officials here, you've heard a lot, and you probably will today, about New York and Philadelphia and Chicago and Oakland and Los Angeles. You're going to hear a lot of big city names thrown around. The lessons that we're learning in these large cities are not confined to them, right? So the lessons and the things we're learning, the ideas, we can spread them to cities and towns of all sizes. So don't feel like the things we're talking about don't have relevance or applicability to where you are. They certainly do. So don't feel that way. The other thing I want to do before I get started into my slides, I always do this as when I'm talking to groups of younger folks, especially students, just to give them a little tease on history. So I usually ask people to name their favorite city of the ancient world. Right? Now you all just got really nervous there for a minute, thinking back to your history classes. So mine is the city of Carthage. Everyone knows Carthage, right, in North Africa. Carthage is kind of the Philadelphia of the ancient world. Right? Philadelphia exists in the shadow of New York City. Our beloved Philadelphia Phillies only have 2 world championships, while the New York Yankees have, I don't know, 102, whatever it is. Yeah, exactly. Right? So think of Carthage sitting in the shadow of Rome, right? In the shadow of the Roman Empire, never getting its due. Great generals like Hannibal, always compared to their Roman counterparts, never getting their due. So I mention that to make a point, and the point is this. Ever since the ancient times, ever since people have been congregating and governing themselves in cities and towns and villages, it's never been more possible for people without office or without title to affect the way their government works and their communities work. So for the high school and college students in here, it has never in the history of civilization been easier for you to interact with and affect the way your government works through the application of data and technology. So that's pretty exciting. So let's talk about how we got here. So when I think about, and Corey mentioned this, I think, governments have been collecting data for a long, long time. When I think about governments collecting information and collecting data and then disseminating it for outside use, I think of the Census Bureau. The Census Bureau has an unimaginable amount of data, petabytes of data that they collect and maintain and distribute and disseminate for people to use. So they're really sort of the touchstone for how open data and the movement to collect and release data got started. And along the road, we've had several important milestones. So if you've ever been to Philly, or you've been to New York or Chicago or any big city, you've probably tried to find your way around. And you may have used a smartphone application or a website or something that told you where the subway stations were or when the next train was coming. All of those things are possible, and they're increasingly available in cities across the country because of data, because of a data standard that was developed by Google. And it has since been generalized into what's now called the General Transit Feed Specification. And what it means is that anybody that runs a transit system that releases their data in a similar format can benefit from Google adopting it, and also a cottage industry of developers that have grown around this to actually build these applications that everyone's using. In the past few years, we've had several important what are called app contests. The District of Columbia, a nonprofit in Washington, D.C. called Sunlight Labs, and both New York City and Chicago have all run successful app contests. They're like hackathons in the sense that they bring in citizen developers or citizen activists that are rooted in technology to build things. And these cities have said, if you come and you build things that work well and make our cities work better, we'll pay you money. We'll give you awards. We'll hold you up as champions and heroes. And in my mind, those sorts of things really got this movement going. It's called civic hacking. So when people think of hacking, they think of bad things. They think of people breaking into computer systems and stealing information. But I think that word's sort of been co-opted by the popular media. What it really means, hackers really are people that like to solve problems and to figure things out. And that's really what the civic hacking movement is all about. And you see it growing across the country. As Luke mentioned before, there's 50 some odd brigades around the country now and growing of people coming together to hack their cities, to hack their communities, to make them work better. So what we've seen happen is the app contest has sort of transitioned into this volunteer brigade of people that want to use the information that governments are releasing to do things. In the city of Philadelphia recently, there was a school that actually developed a plan to take crime information from the city of Philadelphia, which I'll talk about in just a moment, and actually for themselves, using their own geospatial analysis to route the safest walk to school for the people that went to that school. It was really ingenious. It used information that the city provided, and it solved a real problem in their lives. And that's really what we see. We see these external users, the people that are demanding information from governments, as the real driver for open data. They're actually informing what we do, what we release, and the things that we choose to engage with people on. All right, so as I mentioned before, this is just a quick example of something we've released in the city of Philadelphia. It's taken from what we call an open data portal. An open data portal is a phone book for open data. It's a repository where we can list and describe the information that we make available to people in the city of Philadelphia. Now, when we released this data, we didn't release it as a paper report. We didn't release it as a PDF document that you can download and print out. We released it as usable data, so data that you can actually bring into some sort of software or application and start to do something with. Create a map. Create something that tells you the relationship between crime incidents and vacant housing, the incidents of crime and the location of transit stops, the kinds of crimes that occur around bike stands or bike racks, these sorts of things. The idea here is not just to make data available, it's to make it available with intent, and that intent is to engage people to come and do something with that data. Find something that's important in your life, in your everyday activities, and use this information to answer a question. So what are some of the things that people are doing with our data? Well, let me just give you a few quick examples. There are actually hundreds of these examples of things, large and small, complicated and simple, that people have built. So on the upper left, you'll see something that's called Philly Tree Map. And what it is, it's actually a smartphone application that maps the entire urban forest in Philadelphia, all of the trees that exist in all of our neighborhoods throughout the city. The really interesting thing about this application is it's crowdsourced. So it lets people actually report back information on our inventory of trees. So if you are someone who wants to measure, if this is what you do for kicks, you want to measure the canopy coverage of a tree or the circumference of the tree, we will let you do that because all of those things can factor into the amount of greenhouse gases or pollution that these trees offset. And all of that is built on data. In the upper right, there's an application. I actually use this one a lot. It's named for it's called Baldwin. It's named for the old Baldwin locomotive works in Philadelphia. But it shows you the times that your train is coming. It's green if it's on time. It becomes yellow if it's between 0 and 10 minutes late. And if it's more than 10 minutes late, it becomes red. I use this all the time to catch my train. It was built by a friend. It was built by someone. They don't charge money for it. It uses information that our transit authority makes available. And it's widely used and solves a real problem that people face every day. Now, down front and center is something called Philly Crime Mapper. This is something that another friend of mine actually used with the crime data we released because he wanted to give people the ability to find information about crime in their neighborhoods. And in Philadelphia, as in I think most big cities, there's sometimes a debate about where the neighborhood lines fall, which neighborhood do you belong to. So he wanted to let people free-form draw polygons on a map and then look at crime information within that area. And he did it quickly and simply within probably several days' work. And it is now free for anyone to use in the city of Philadelphia. So those are all things that people are building with information released by the government in Philadelphia that affect real problems people face every day, and more of them are being built. Whoops, go back one. There we go. Who's doing this? Who are these people? These crazy people who are building things with information. These are the folks that you'll see at a Code for America brigade. Or these are the folks that you'll see at a hackathon or at a weekly hack night or something. These are people that come together to share ideas and to share problems and to try and develop solutions to those problems. And in many places we're seeing the ranks of these people growing and growing and growing. And I think that's happening because there's an increased awareness of the power of data and information and the fact that more and more governments are making it available. And also, all of this is now occurring at a time when the tools and the software and the platforms that we have to build these solutions on become more powerful and more widespread. So I had a show of hands earlier when Luke was talking about phones. Let's do it the opposite way. Who doesn't have some sort of miniature computer on them at this time? Name your hand, or raise your hand. Come on, get it up there. All right. But it's the overwhelming or the underwhelming minority, I guess, of people that don't, right? Most of us have devices on us. These are computing platforms that all of us can leverage to bring information and applications directly into people's hands. That's incredibly powerful. And these are the folks that are doing it. So I want to sort of share an idea with you, particularly for the local government officials here. So who's heard of Amazon, the company Amazon, right? What do? They sell books, right? They sell books, things like that. They actually do more than that. And the gentleman that runs that company, a very smart man named Jeff Bezos, he knew he wanted to change what Amazon was doing, and he did it very deliberately. He's changed Amazon into a company that now runs the majority of the internet. The majority of the internet now runs on Amazon. And he did that when you're an IT professional and you want to deploy a system. Usually what you had to do is you had to go out and buy hardware. You had to go out and buy a system, plug it in, set it up, and then deploy your system on that. Well, he sort of changed the game on that. He said, I'll give you infrastructure on demand. You just tell me what you need, I'll slice it and dice it, and I'll give it to you. Easy peasy, no muss, no fuss. The way they did that was, he said, all of our internal operating units, we're going to act almost as customers of ourselves. We're going to eat our own dog food. It's called dog fooding in the software world. You make it, you eat it yourselves, and then you release it. And what he said was, all of these things we're going to do, we're going to expose them as services, and we must be able to turn them outward so that when we're ready, we can point them at our customers, and our customers can come and use them. And it was enormously successful. I believe that what we're doing with open data is we're doing sort of the reverse of that. So all of this data that we've released and we've made available for people, increasingly now we're finding other governments, even other units of our own government who are coming to us and saying, I didn't know we had information on that. I didn't know you made it available in such an easy to use format. Can I use that? This is very important for governments. Consider this. In the city of Philadelphia, the office that assesses the value of property for taxation is different than the office that levies a millage rate against that assessed value. They are also different in terms of who offers an exemption from taxation. The way we communicate across organizational and structural boundaries is important for the efficient operation of government. And data, by and large, does not respect those boundaries that we put up in between the different divisions of government. So I believe what we're seeing is the reverse of what happened with Amazon. We're turning all this information outward and then learning how we can pull it back and use it ourselves to make government more efficient. All this is shifting the way that governments work. The role that governments have is sort of changing. This is a quote from a report from the Center for Technology and Government in Albany. And essentially what it says is that the role of governance is changing. Governments typically think of themselves as the ones that build the websites and the apps that people use to interact and transact with government. And if you looked at some of the examples I just showed you from Philadelphia, that paradigm is changing. If you go to a big city and go to a subway platform or a bus stop and look at what people are doing, they're doing this. They're looking to see when their train is going to come. By and large, they're using things that weren't built by the transit authority. So think about that for a minute. This is a critical function of anybody running a transit system, telling people when the train is coming. You cannot run a railroad without telling people that. And by and large, the interfaces that people are using are no longer built by government. So we're really changing the paradigm here. And the role of government is shifting from one of the builder of apps and becoming more of a data steward. Now we're enabling other people to build things that they can use to get service or transact with their government or do whatever they need to do. And that's a fundamental shift for government. It'll take us a long time to shift to where we're going next. But consider this. There was a time when government agencies didn't use the internet to deliver services. Can anyone imagine operating a government right now without a website or without using the internet to engage with or communicate with citizens? We can't imagine that now. There will come a time in the not too distant future when we can't imagine interacting with citizens or carrying out our business of government without publishing data and engaging people and enabling them to build applications. So that's all I had. I'm sure I confused a lot of people, and there are many questions.
Introducing technology could be a hassle. So in what ways would the innovations be advertised to the public without any annoyances?
I'll let you take that one.
Okay, I came to this realm from the 311 CRM systems, constituent relationship management systems. And part of, I think it's a really good point that people are invested within organizations in what they do. We've all heard the phrase, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And if that were the case, we'd all still be riding around in horse and buggies rather than our cars and our minivans and things like that. But in implementing any kind of new technology, I think it's important to keep in mind the people systems. And you have to bring people along. And when you have like a 311 CRM system especially, that's a fundamental different way of doing business. Rather than having a distributed model where each department is handling its own phone calls, suddenly you've got all the phone calls coming into one location, and you've got call agents that are handling the vast majority of the calls with one, a first call resolution. So people are no longer getting transferred, 8, 9 times trying to get to the right department with their question or the information that they're looking for. Luke talked about, the 24 departments that you had to go, or permits that you had to fill out. And I think that's, all of those departments have that information that they need, and getting them to understand that if they give it up, there's going to be something bigger coming out of it, is critical to introducing technology in a smooth fashion.
There's not always a budget for new technology, so how would you assess, even though you have the new technology coming, how would you assess the budget for that technology?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Governments get kind of a bad rap with for investing in technology and managing technology, and I don't know that a lot of people that are outside government or haven't worked in government fully appreciate, the things like the length of the budget cycle, the length of the procurement cycle. And these are things that don't lend themselves well to rapidly evolving technologies. So I think one of the benefits of thinking about the changing role of government to, instead of becoming the one that builds everything, to being more of an enabler, a data steward that lets other people build things, is that governments can disinvest themselves in that process that they're not really well suited for. It's not that governments don't have smart people that work for them, or it's not that they don't understand technology, it's that the processes of government were not set up with the understanding that the pace of technology change would be what it is. And especially we see that in many consumer-facing technologies. All the technologies you see on your devices right now are all ones that largely didn't exist just a few years ago. And the way we build those things changes so rapidly. Just think of something as simple as a website. Somebody used the analogy of gardening to me in respect to technology not long ago, and I said, I think that may be not a great analogy, because I can tend my garden in much the same way that I did 100 years ago. It's water, soil, and sunlight. I'm going to be pretty successful. When you think about technology, and think more particularly about citizen-facing technology like a website, I really can't even use the same methodologies or tools that were in use even 10 years ago. It's not practical anymore. And that rapid pace of change is one that most government processes, particularly the ones that we use to buy technology, aren't really well suited for. So that's why I think it's really important for governments to consider the evolution of our role as a builder of citizen-facing things, and to become more an enabler of that.
So we know that putting data sets out there is definitely something that we all have to do. However, it's not an easy task. As you know, you have to put out clean data. So what level of staffing do you have, or do you recommend having, in order to get through preparing and putting out the data sets for the public? And 2, how do you prioritize what order to put them out? We have tons of data sets.
That's a really great question. So I always describe to people that open data is a process. It's not an outcome. So it's not something that you have to say, I can't do any of this until I've developed my team and I have perfectly clean data, and that I'm fully staffed up and ready to go. I think if we look at it as a process, we start with the data that it exists publicly already, that we've essentially released, but perhaps maybe not in its most useful form. So what data do we have hiding on websites? Maybe the things that show up as a call in a 311 center, things that we have in PDF documents or in paper that we could fairly easily transition to digital form and start there. That's, I think, largely the story of most open data programs and how they got started. They started out very small and very humbly. I know ours did. And I think you'll be surprised at how far and how fast you go. I should also point out, too, one of the things we've done in Philadelphia is we've developed a guidebook sort of getting started with open data, because a lot of the people that I talk to in our 90-some-odd city departments don't know what we're doing. So I have to be able to tell them, here's what we're doing. It's a public document. I'd be happy to share it. We can send that out so that other folks can use it to get started.
You mentioned people using open data to find a safer route to get to school. And you always hear about in Orlando how kids are getting approached by perverts and getting hit by cars going to and from school. So why don't we use open data to make sure kids get safely to and from school?
I think it's a great idea. I think the key ingredient there is the information. So it's someone's job to compile all that and keep track of those incidents as they occur. And I don't know if what the city of Orlando does, but it's certainly, there are enough other cities doing it. I think it would be a great start to find out, number one, if the city of Orlando does release that information, and if they don't, then you should say, I can point you to a list of 15 or 20 other cities that do this. Would you consider doing it? That'd be a great way to start.
Well, and that could be a great crowdsourcing exercise too, because, you know, point A to point B, the shortest route is not necessarily going to be the safest route. And so you actually need the citizens who live in that neighborhood to come in and say, okay, there is a bridge that the kids can walk over a busy highway here. It may take them a little bit longer to get to school that way, but it's a much safer route for them. And then also combining it with, you know, criminal data as well. You know, what's happening where on the ground.
This question is for Mark. And I'm just wondering, how does your office work with different agencies? Do they push the data to you, or sometimes you have to do the policing to go to them? And is there any requirement in the ordinance saying what kind of data they need to push that to you? Let me just add one point here. This is an era of big data, and it's very interesting to see the position like a chief data officer be established in different cities. But this is a horizontal position. How does that work with the vertical each agencies? Please enlighten us a little bit.
Sure. So the executive order that was signed by our mayor requires departments to identify what are called high-value data. Now, the definition of what is high value is certainly that's something that's open to interpretation. But we have sort of both ends of the spectrum. So we have many departments that use data every day. They understand its power, and they may want to consult with us on the best way to do it. What's the best way to release this information that will make it most usable, that will make it easy for people to take up and do things with? And how do we engage people? I mean, that's a really big one for governments. You know, governments have traditionally released data. You look in the world of geospatial data for a while. I think the trick here, especially for those departments that have been doing it for a while, is how do I not just put it out there? How do I actually engage people? How do I get them to be interested in it? How do I get them to tell me what they don't like about it or what they want to see more of? So that's a new one for many departments, even if they have a long history with data. There are agencies that look at what we're doing as an additional job. It's more work for them to do. It's my job and the job of my counterparts in other cities to explain the broader vision for this and the broader benefit when we make data more usable. And I think a lot of it goes back to what I was talking about with the Amazon example. It's that you need to have a mayor or a governor or a president or someone who's going to be able to set the vision and say, you may not understand fully what we're doing when you're down here in the trenches gutting it out or fighting in a budget cycle, and you're looking at one more thing that you've got to do when you're already understaffed and underfunded. But there's a larger vision, a longer-term benefit to what you're doing. And those kinds of discussions are ones that we'll need to have going forward. It'll always be a bit of a challenge, but I always say if it wasn't, then they wouldn't need me.
Okay, great. Someone raised the concern about software updates and whether or not cities or citizens would have to continuously upgrade their machines to be able to stay consistent with the services that you're offering through technology. Have you discussed that? Are there any solutions for that? What would you say to someone that may be concerned about that?
So I think, guess that'll always be a challenge in the world of technology, right? I think what you're seeing is more of the applications and the information and the transactions of government going through a single application, right, through a web browser. We see that even with mapping, which used to require specialized technology and specialized platforms. Now you can pretty much use a web browser to do that. So as long as you're keeping your web browser updated, I think you'll be okay.
And I think that's why we see a lot more talk about cloud services as well, because it doesn't.
Good point.
You put the responsibility onto the software provider to provide the upgrades if you're using a cloud service versus if you're trying to handle it in-house. And as Mark was pointing out, I can't imagine a local government right now in the U.S. that would say, oh yeah, we've got plenty of staff and plenty of resources to do what we need to do for our citizens. It's always going to be tight, quite frankly. We're in that new normal now. So again, going back to technology and putting the burden on the service providers in some ways to provide those updates and things like that is one of the ways that I think local governments have to perhaps work smarter.
I think it's fabulous with what's going on with the applications and using the data that you're doing, but my question to Mark is, how do you protect the integrity of the application? Because yes, you're pushing information out, but they're also collecting data on the back end. Do you have any processes in place? Do you have any standards that you put your application developers through? Are there any contracts signed or anything like that to protect the integrity of the city of Philadelphia and its citizens while you're pushing all of these different things out?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So the big issue for governments when we position ourselves as data stewards and empowerers of outside people that want to build things is there's an abdication of control, right? We don't control what the app looks like or how it works or how often it's updated or even if it's of high quality. And I don't have a clean answer for you. I don't have a perfect answer for you. But I think by and large, the way that we consume apps today, I think most people understand that many times apps are disposable. Apps of low quality can be gotten rid of pretty quickly. And that the marketplace, if we do it right, the marketplace for things will elevate some real winners and some things that are really awesome and really great. So for governments, I think part of being a data steward is setting up the right incentives to reward people and to recognize people that do it the right way. So if, for example, when we release data and when any government releases data, we have a set of terms and conditions that go along with that. You can't misrepresent the data. There are certain things you agree not to do with that data, things like that. But we're sort of in an evolution here, right? This is not a perfect scenario. We have a lot of growing to do and a lot of maturing to do as data stewards. And I'm confident we'll figure that out, though, along the way.